Thank you very much, everyone, for being here with us today and for supporting the Mises Institute. Thank you particularly to Don Wells for sponsoring this talk on phony civil rights. I appreciate your support for the defense of liberty, which will be my subject today. I'm Wanjiru Njoya. I'm the Walter E. Williams Research Fellow at the Mises Institute. And I'm greatly honored that my fellowship is named for Dr. Williams because he was a great defender of liberty, and people remember him as a defender of liberty. Often when I say to people that my fellowship is named after Walter E. Williams, they say, "Oh, I miss Dr. Williams." People missed him when he was no longer speaking in public and on the radio. He used to guest host the Rush Limbaugh show. And people miss him because he gave them hope. This is what people want most of all when they're despairing that the liberty will ever come. People want hope, and that's what he gave to them. And I think that's what they express when they say that they miss him. Walter Williams defended liberty in all its aspects. He defended liberty without regard to the politics of the groups that were defending liberty, and that's what I really want to emphasize in my talk today. Readers of Murray Rothbard's work will be aware that he defended liberty from the perspective of self-ownership and property rights, and that's the reason why he described civil rights as phony civil rights. They're rights that undermine liberty and that cannot be founded in private property. And Murray Rothbard's philosophy of liberty and the reason why he rejected phony civil rights has also been echoed by other great libertarians, including Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell. I think at this time last year when I gave a talk on phony civil rights, I went through some of the speeches of Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell, and I was explaining why they rejected property rights. Civil rights. If anybody wants to read about that, it's all on the Mises website, because what I want to do today is to look beyond the libertarian foundations for rejecting phony civil rights and look at some of the conservative foundations for rejecting civil rights. There are those in the conservative tradition who also think that civil rights are phony, and in search of a conservative tradition that defends liberty, you could look no further than the American South, where all the states rejected the Civil Rights Acts, not just the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is the one that Lou Rockwell writes about in his article, Repeal 64, but also the previous Civil Rights Acts, the very first Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the second Civil Rights Act of 1871. And so I think it is to that tradition that we can look for a reason why they would reject civil rights. When I say all the southern states, that is all of them. People often say, well, but Tennessee didn't reject the Civil Rights Act. That's because the then government of Tennessee kidnapped the legislators who had decided not to show up to support. This was when the ratification of the 14th Amendment was going through. Some of you may know that the purpose of the 14th Amendment was to prevent challenges to the Civil Rights Acts as being unconstitutional. And so when the legislators of Tennessee decided not to show up to ratify the 14th Amendment, they kidnapped them and ignored court orders secured under writ of habeas corpus to release them. Also ignored the speaker when he said that was not correct parliamentary procedure. So that's why I include Tennessee when I say all the southern states. And so I'm looking to conservatives who follow the intellectual tradition of John C. Calhoun. As you may know, there are so many different types of conservatives. I'm certainly not speaking about the neoconservatives here, but about the conservatives who follow the intellectual tradition of John C. Calhoun. And you can summarize their intellectual tradition on three main points in terms of defending liberty. They regard individual liberty as essential to safeguarding the natural rights of man. They champion constitutional government and limited government because they understand that it's important to limit the power of government to encroach on individual liberty. And these are conservatives who understand that a government with unlimited power is a tyrannical government. And the whole point about civil rights is that it is the main platform that on which people justify giving even more power to the government. The reason why they do this is because supposedly everybody loves equality. So if you say we need more power in the central government because we want to promote equality, everybody says, oh, great, those are our ideals. We agree with them. And this is why this intellectual tradition that rejects the notion that equality justifies increasing government power is really so important. And it is to this tradition that I look for hope in seeing how much support there is out there for defending liberty. One of the things that people say when I talk about rejecting phony civil rights, rejecting the Civil Rights Acts, rejecting the 14th Amendment, one of the things that people say to me is, that's a really niche opinion. Nobody thinks that way. You're like literally the only person who thinks this way. Maybe with two other libertarians, nobody else agrees. And this is why I want to show just how much support there is. And I've gone to 1972 for a good example of the tradition that I'm trying to describe here. This is 1972 at the height of what was a difficult time in the South. I just chose South Carolina as an example, but you can find examples of this from many different parts of the South. And here, this is somebody writing in the Charleston News in 1872. And look at his message. It's a message of hope. He's looking ahead to the future, looking ahead to better times ahead. He says, surely a better time is coming. You know, what better message could one send to a troubled nation? Surely a better time is coming, a time when every man in South Carolina shall be measured by his conduct and character, not by the glibness of tongue or the color of his skin. And he says, this is the hope in which we live. This is the hope to which we look ahead. This is the hope deferred. This is the hope for which we thought we were all living for and in many cases dying for, that the day is coming when South Carolina shall be governed with decency, with justice, and with ability. And I just love this message of hope deferred, and I think we can see this through the wider South, and in fact, through the country and through the world, this idea that we live in a time, we hope to live in a time when men shall be judged by their conduct and character and not by the color of their skin. And we can see this from a Confederate writing in the Charleston News in 1872. Looking even deeper into this same tradition, a very good summary of this tradition, if anybody wants to do further reading on it, is Brian McClanahan's article published on the Abbeville website called Conservative as Defender of Liberty. And one of the people that Brian McClanahan talks about in that article is Richard Weaver in his essay, Conservatism and Libertarianism, the Common Ground. And in that, he's trying to find the common ground for why both the libertarian and the conservative tradition defend liberty. They're obviously coming at it from different ideological perspectives. And he's saying the common ground is that we are defenders of liberty. And here, I think what's interesting is that Richard Weaver echoes many of the same themes that Murray Rothbard explores in his essay, Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Nature. And that is to ground the defense of liberty in natural rights and in human nature. And Richard Weaver describes individual liberty as an essential attribute of human nature in a way that very much echoes what we've seen from Murray Rothbard. And Weaver says, "It is my contention that a conservative is a realist who believes that there is a structure of reality independent of his own will and desire. We must look to human nature as it is." He says this structure consists not merely of the great physical world, but also of many laws, principles, and regulations which control human behavior. As you know, Rothbard has said that egalitarianism revolts against human nature because it tries to fashion human beings into something that they're not. It is rejecting reality and rejecting human nature, and that is echoed here by Richard Weaver. He says, though this reality is independent of the individual, it is not hostile to him. In fact, what's really interesting about this tradition is that it vests both rights and duties in the individual, not in the state, not in society, not in the nation, but in the individual. If you look at the Confederate tradition, that is an important part of the heritage of the South, and if you look to the origins of the raising of the Confederate armies, it was very much based on an individual responsibility to stand for liberty. The book, a book by Jim Webb on the Scots-Irish tradition in America explains this really well, how each man came from his own home, from his own farm, because he felt it was his duty to stand for liberty. He wasn't looking for some government to come and secure his liberty for him, or some state to come and secure his liberty for him. He saw that as his own individual responsibility, and that was why he stood. And I think that's what Richard Weaver is explaining here, that reality is not hostile to the individual. It is, in fact, amenable by him in many ways, but it cannot be changed radically and arbitrarily. And this is the basis on which he rejected the progressives, the revolutionaries who think they can create their own reality and then force everybody, which is exactly what they're trying to do with civil rights. And that's why I call it tyranny, because they've decided we have this great new world we're going to build. We're going to do that through civil rights. You either get on board or we force you to do so. That is tyrannical. That is absolutely incompatible with individual liberty. And so Weaver criticized radicals who revolt against reality. He said the radical makes his own will the law. If you talk to radicals, progressives, you can hear them. They speak like this normally all the time. In normal conversation, this is how they speak. They will tell you their opinion. They will say, I don't like this, I don't like that. And then they will make their own will into the law. And when you try to explain to them, but that's just your opinion, they don't understand what you're saying. What are you trying to get at? Yes, it's my opinion. That's why it's the law. That's the way that they think. When they so one of the points that Walter Williams made when he was defending the Confederate statues of the South from being destroyed, he tried to say Confederate generals fought for independence from the Union, just as George Washington fought for independence from Great Britain. And progressives will tell you, yeah, but I like George Washington, I don't like the Confederates. That's the way they reason. They think their will is the law. And that's what Weaver is criticizing. He says the progressive fancies that his dream or his wish can be substituted for the great world of reality. In fact, they think of their own internal crazy ideas as reality. And they speak, you listen, you see some of the things they write, like in their critical race theories. You think, surely that's insane. But that's what they view as reality, and they think they can create reality out of their own fevered imaginations. And Richard Weaver says they are constantly getting into fixes from which some good conservative has to rescue him. They come up with some scheme and you all have to go and bail them out. And they do this repeatedly. And you say, oh, they'll learn from that mistake. No, they don't learn from any mistakes. They just create the next disaster. And Weaver says, the conservative I therefore see as standing on terra firma of antecedent reality, having accepted some things as given, lasting and good. That is what conservatism is in his view. And he says the conservative is therefore in a position to use his effort where effort will produce solid results. Because we know that cause and effect matter. Unless you have a correct grasp of reality, you cannot produce solid results. And this is why Richard Weaver rejects these insane radicals. He says the radical's first thought now is to get control of the state, because he needs control of the state to impose his will on everybody. He wants to make all men equal, or he wants to make all men rich, or failing that, to make all men equally unhappy. He wants to abolish differences between anybody's lived experience. The use of political instrumentality to coerce people to conform with his dream in the face of their belief in a real order is our reason, I think, for objecting to the radical. And he sees this as a common point between libertarians and conservatives. He says that he sees a commonality between the conservative rootedness in reality and praxeology. He says praxeology, briefly defined, is the science of how things work because of their essential natures. We find out what reality is not by consulting our wishes or our imagination, but by observing them, by observing reality. And he gives examples of praxeological laws. And he says these are so universal that we think of these laws as part of the order of things. Not only is this law a reliable index of human behavior, it also makes possible the free market economy with its extremely important contribution to political freedom. And another Southern conservative that I want to look at, in addition to Richard Weaver, is Mel Bradford, who is a friend of David Gordon's and perhaps many people here today, who rejected what he called the pseudo-religion of equality. He said it's treated as a religion that openly insists on equality of condition and the attendant proposition that the state should foster the leveling of people to make everybody all equal. And he tries to show that this is incompatible with liberty, and we should care if the law is incompatible with liberty, and we should reject laws that are incompatible with liberty. He says equality achieved is the mainspring, the central teaching of the left's secular theology. They treat it as their religion that everybody has to follow. He says this is the kind of equality of opportunity that insists on the right results in every contest. They claim, the progressives who are very clever with words, they claim that they don't want equality of condition, that they only want equality of opportunity, but their equality of opportunity insists on the right results in every contest. And if they don't get the right result, you know what they say? Oh, that's because we don't have enough equality of opportunity. And so they're back on the warpath. This is what Mel Bradford is warning against. He says he has tried to put forward this message, and he says most libertarians and some conservatives, he's talking here about the libertarians who say they love equality of opportunity, they love the dream of Martin Luther King that he plagiarized from a South Carolinian Confederate. They love, they say, if we do it properly, we can do this great equality. In fact, you get some libertarians who say Murray Rothbard wasn't a proper libertarian because he supported all these Southern conservatives, and that shows that he was going off the correct track. No, Murray Rothbard supported these conservatives because they support liberty, and Rothbard supported liberty. So these are the people that Bradford is referring to here. He says they nod respectfully toward the related nostrum, equality of opportunity, they cannot recognize that as a matter of fact, as a matter of record, as a matter of what we see in political reality, egalitarians always, always, always mean by equality of opportunity a contest between people who enjoy equality of condition. That's really what they're trying to achieve. They want a race between identical people raised in identical circumstances. They engage in endless and monumental handicapping to create this Procrustean world of theirs where everybody has to fit the same size, or they hack off the top, hack off the bottom, trying to equalize everybody. And even if they didn't do that, they would still never be happy with the results that they achieve. He says he's tried for many years to explain to some of his colleagues that only equal persons in equal situations may enjoy equal opportunities. And so I hope to leave you with this message of hope that there are many out there who support liberty and who will stand with us in our quest to end the tyranny of phony civil rights. Thank you.